Good morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I got these remarks coming out of the Federal Reserve dated May 13, 2019. The Federal Reserve's review of its monetary policy strategy, tools, and communication practices. Remarks by Richard Clarida, Vice Chair, Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Pretty typical Federal Reserve speak. Talks about their mandate to keep employment, or keep unemployment low, keep prices stable with a 2% inflation kind of mandate. So this 2% inflation is like the growth that we would expect. Prices would be just stable enough that you don't really notice the increase, but yet we continue to have this growth. But what he says here towards the end I found quite interesting. It says, another key development in recent decades is that inflation appears less responsive to the resource slack, implying a change in the dynamic relationship between inflation and employment. This change is, in a sense, a proverbial double-edged sword. It permits the Federal Reserve to support employment more aggressively during downturns, as was the case during and after the Great Recession. Because the sustained inflation breakout is less likely when inflation is less responsive to employment conditions. However, the dynamic also increases the cost in terms of economic output, reversing unwelcome increases in long-run inflation expectations. Thus, it is all the more important that the long-run inflation expectation remains anchored at the levels consistent with our 2% inflation objective. So you guys hear what's going on there is that, if you didn't quite get it, is that over the last decade, typically in the past, when the Federal Reserve would go to stimulate the economy, they would drop interest rates down. This new credit would get its way into the system, causing the growth to take place. Once this growth started kicking in, then the employment starts to rise, and the newfound money would start finding its way into the system, causing the money velocity to start kicking in. And once the money velocity starts to rise, and the inflation starts to rise as well, that's when the Federal Reserve would then raise interest rates in order to combat the rising inflation. But what he is saying now is that when the Federal Reserve dropped interest rates and started stimulating the economy with these lower interest rates, the employment started to rise, but the inflation didn't. So now it's cool because now they can get all this employment that they want without the fear of this inflation. But the problem is that they actually want a little bit of inflation and they're not getting it. So he is saying there that it is all more important that the long-run inflation expectation remains anchored at levels consistent with the 2% inflation objective. So my question to you guys is what is it the Federal Reserve is going to do into the future to make sure that they maintain this 2% inflation that they're not getting? See, they need to stimulate the economy in order to get this inflation going, right? They need to get people out there to spend their money. They need them to spend more of their money. And how are they going to do that? And that'd be my question to you guys. Uneducated Economist. We'll talk to you later.